Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Macbeth Act 1 Scene 3. So when shall we three meet, Macbeth? Will it be this scene? Yes it will, but not straight away, because first we're giving the witches a little bit more airtime, mainly to show us a little bit more of their characters, show some of their motivations, and to doff our cap to King James I. More on that momentarily. We are then going to meet Macbeth and Banquo, and we'll actually observe them meet the witches who are going to give them some prophecies, 3 prophecies each, the most notable of course being that Macbeth will become Thane of Cawdor and then king afterwards. And of course we get to see their response to this very strange situation. As soon as they've heard the prophecies and the witches have disappeared, in come some of Duncan's gang, some lords, to tell Macbeth that he has in fact become Thane of Cawdor, demonstrating to him and to us, although we already knew through dramatic irony, that the prophecies potentially could come true. So there's a plot summary in a nutshell for you. Okay, so I mentioned before that we needed to have a little think about why the witches are here in this moment. It's not just about creating a bit of mystery and intrigue around Macbeth, it's also about consolidating how powerful they are. So note once more, we've got our pathetic fallacy in the thunder that sounds in the background as they approach. I said to you previously, witches and the thunder and lightning always come together, so we're reminded of their power. But we're also told that actually their motivations are really petty, that they're not necessarily working on great big huge plans. In fact, this little spell that they're about to cast is simply because some woman who was married to a sailor wouldn't give the witch some chestnuts, and so she's like, oh, give me chestnuts. She said no. Right, let's curse your husband. So note the way that the kind of witchiness, the supernatural kind of element, is demonstrated through form, because we've got our rhyming couplets. In a sieve I'll thither sail, and like a rat without a tail, I'll do. Note again, 3 is the magic number. Got a little triad. One more time, emphasizing their witchiness. Remember back to Act 1, Scene 1, where we talked about meter. Again, we've got the witches speaking or using trochaic tetrameter. I will drain him dry as hay, sleep shall neither night nor day. So again, it makes him different, more otherly from the other characters. And note where those stresses fall on those kind of key words: drain, dry, hay, etc. We then have how horrible this guy's life is going to be, or this guy's experience on the boat is going to be. He shall live a man forbid, weary 7 nights, 9 times 9 shall he dwindle, peak and pine. So little triad emphasizing his suffering. And then we've got some lovely storm imagery at the end, the idea of him being tempest tossed. Now, those of you who've seen my video for Act 1, Scene 1, you might be having a little momentary, ooh, click in your brains. That's right, King James I. I told you before that King James thought the witches cursed his ship. So Shakespeare is clearly doffing the cap here. He's saying, oh yeah, I know what witches get up to, just like they did to you. That's what these witches are doing. So demonstrates that little bit of interest or engagement for the king there as well. And then just the last bit here, we have very clearly a lovely bit of spell casting here. We've got the rhyming couplets. Note again, we've got that reference to the number 3. So the scene begins with witchy mischief getting us ready for what is about to occur. Let's find out what that is. Okay, we're about to meet Macbeth. Finally, guess what he says? The first thing he says: so foul and fair a day I have not seen. Does that sound familiar to you? It should, because what it's actually doing, it's echoing the language that was used by the witches at the end of Act 1, Scene 1, where they said, fair is foul and foul is fair, hover through the fog and filthy air. Look at this. Foul, foul, fair, fair. So by repeating the imagery and the kind of antithetical or juxtaposing phrasing here, Shakespeare's not just reminding us of the theme of appearance and reality, but he's tying the witches together, okay? Sorry, the witches and Macbeth together. He's showing that they are linked. So warning signals should be going off in all of our brains. What's going on? What's Macbeth about? Because he's clearly linked to these witches. Okay, so Banquo, when he first meets the witches, he has fairly stereotypical responses to the witches and their otherness. So note the use of interrogatives, okay, basically fancy word for questions. So if you actually look, almost everything he says, I mean, that's logistical, is question based. So we've got 3 questions all in one go. What are these so withered and so wild in their attire? Note how those adjectives withered and wild are emphasized by the use of alliteration. And then we've got this really descriptive language. Her chappy finger, skinny lips, so notice the use of adjectives there. And then here is a fairly typical Jacobean thing in terms of they're women, but they're otherly, so he can't describe them as such. So he's like, you should be women. Note the modal verb, you should. But you've got beards, so you can't be. Not very appropriate in this day and age, but back then he's trying to point out their otherness. Okay, so here we have the 3 prophecies given to Macbeth, all very self-explanatory. Hail to thee, Thane of Glamis. He already is Thane of Glamis. That's his title. Hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor. Oh, dramatic irony alert, because we know he's about to be told, or we know he's about to be promoted to Thane of Cawdor. And then final one, thou shalt be king hereafter. 3 is the magic number, 3 prophecies. Okay. Now that they've had the prophecies, we've got to actually have a little look at their responses. So this is actually Banquo speaking, but we learn a lot about Macbeth's reaction through Banquo's musings and considerations. He says, "Good sir, why do you start and seem to fear things that do sound so fair?" So that means that Macbeth is like shocked, visibly, notably. He looks frightened, enough for Banquo to comment on it. Banquo doesn't seem in any way sort of suspicious at this moment, certainly not of Macbeth. He says, "My noble partner, you greet with grace, present grace, and great prediction of noble having and of royal hope, that he seems rapt withal." So note this semantic field of nobility. We've got noble, grace, great, noble, royal. So at the moment he sees Macbeth as nothing more or nothing worse than the worthiest of men. Like there's no suspicion here at all. Although he does notice that he is rapt withal, that he's sort of caught up in his feelings. So again, another reference to Macbeth's reactions. And then Shakespeare uses this brilliant metaphor that's sort of extended in different ways throughout the play. He says, if you can look into the seeds of time, so that's the beginning of the metaphor, and say which grain will grow and which will not. So again, extending this idea of the metaphor of time being like a plant growing. "Speak then to me, who neither beg nor fear your favours nor your hate." This is really important. Banquo's like, I'd like to know, but I don't put any stock in you. I don't fear you. I'm not desperate to know more about you. You've given Macbeth some prophecies, so let's hear some. That's really important because we should read Banquo differently to Macbeth. Macbeth is wrapped up. Banquo's like, yeah, let's hear it. What have you got to say? And now let's look at his predictions. Okay, lesser than Macbeth and greater. Not so happy, yet much happier. Thou shalt get kings, thou there be none. So quite paradoxical in phrasing, quite confusing in phrasing. They're saying you're never going to have the same status as Macbeth, but you will be better than him, greater, like in personality and trait. You won't be as happy, as in you won't have all of the things that people perceive to create happiness, but you are going to be a much happier character. Very true. And then this is the biggie. Thou shalt get kings, though thou be none. So you're not going to be king, but your descendants will be. Now, hang on a tickety-boo. Okay, it's been disproved. It's not actually true. But at the time, and that's what's important, at the time Shakespeare wrote this, people genuinely thought that King James was a descendant from Banquo. So when Shakespeare writes this into the play, he's saying, hey, King James, Banquo's a good guy. You're the rightful heir. Like, this is you. It's not the first time that he does it either. So a little contextual point for you there. Okay, dramatic irony time. Woo! Macbeth is obviously shocked by the idea of this being the case and this being true. I've said there in my little bubble, count the imperatives, but really, stay, you imperfect speakers. So there's one. Tell me more. There's another one. Okay, down here. Say from whence you owe this strange intelligence. Speak, I charge you. So we've got 4 imperative phrases here, just in one little speech, demonstrating, yeah, his kind of sense of power and control, like he feels like he is in charge of them, but it also shows his desperation. We, of course, know that he is about to become Thane of Cawdor. So when he says the Thane of Cawdor lives a prosperous gentleman, he doesn't even know that he betrayed the king yet. He doesn't know anything. So we know so much more than him. So we know that, yeah, it might be strange intelligence, but it's intelligence that is true. Okay. Revelation time. Okay, so Ross appears with some other buddies. And he's like, guess what? You're going to be Thane of Cawdor. Oh, sorry. Banquo is obviously very, very shocked. What? Can the devil speak true? Devil being the witches. And here we have the beginning of a metaphor that is extended so often through this play. Why do you dress me in borrowed robes? So the robes are a metaphor for the title, and he's saying they're borrowed, they don't belong to me. They, of course, belong to the real Thane of Cawdor. So you've got more dramatic irony there in that metaphor. But it also reminds us of how temporary status can be. You know, you can shift robes, you can put them on, you can take them off. Robe, sorry, status. Okay, we're doing well. Okay. Oh, no animations for you today. Apologies. So now we have this kind of the 2 opposing responses between Banquo and Macbeth. So Banquo is all about concern and warning. He says, oftentimes to win us to our harm, the instruments of darkness tell us truth, win us with honest trifles to betray in deepest consequence. So this is really wise. He's saying, hang on a minute. Can we trust them? Perhaps they're giving us one tiny bit of truth so that we will then kind of believe anything that they say, and then they'll end up betraying us. Now, guess what? He's absolutely bang on right, but Macbeth isn't to understand that until much later on in the play. So Banquo is being very wise and very cautious. Macbeth is literally going, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. Hence me saying Macbeth's inner thoughts. So we get this reference, it's an aside. So this is a dramatic device. So basically, the moment you see aside, you know it's his inner thoughts, the audience can hear, but no other characters can. So always worth mentioning. 2 truths are told as happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme. Okay, so that is Thane of Glamis, Thane of Cawdor. Those are the 2 truths. And by calling them prologues in this metaphor, he's saying the next thing to happen will be king. And then he makes reference to that by saying of the imperial theme. So he is immediately thinking to himself, oh, I'm going to become king, and perhaps feeling a bit excited. We break from the aside where he goes, I thank you, gentlemen. And then he goes back into his thinking process about whether or not it can be good, or perhaps we go back to that fair is foul and foul is fair, because he's arguing with himself. How is this good? How is this a good thing when it makes me feel so frightened? But can it be a bad thing when it's obviously begun with truth? But we certainly have this sense of hyperbole being used here, where he talks about the horrid image. Now, you've got to think to yourself, what is he already considering as a horrid image? It's got to be the death of Duncan. And that unfixes his hair and makes his seated heart knock at his ribs. So he is recognizing that he is terrified at the things he's thinking. So he's already being naughty up there. Remember that even thinking these things would have been considered treason at the time. Yay! More of Macbeth's reaction. Look how our partner's wrapped. So that's repeated. Banquo said wrapped. He said he was wrapped with all. Now look how our partner's wrapped. So Macbeth is really caught up. Banquo's noticed it. Macbeth is still in his aside. He's hoping that chance will crown him without his stir. So we're personifying chance here. Without my stir means without my without having to move, without having to do anything. So he's already thinking, God, I hope I'm not going to have to do anything dark and dangerous in order for this to work. So he's already having those difficult thoughts. We've got a lovely little simile from Banquo here. New honours come upon him, like our strange garments, cleave not to their mould, but with the aid of use. And that's extended into a metaphor. It's a slight extension of the why do you dress me in borrowed robes, because he's basically saying this is like him putting on new clothes and they don't quite fit him yet, but I'm sure they will. So he's saying, Macbeth is a bit troubled by this, but I'm sure he'll be all right in the end. That's the kind of gist of it. Okay, so our final thoughts. Why is the scene important? What's its function? So we've got further understanding of the role of the witches and, more importantly, that link to Macbeth. We're setting up the theme of ambition because we're recognising that Macbeth is straight away thinking about becoming king. We're looking at the early friendship and trust between Macbeth and Banquo, something we will juxtapose later as that friendship starts to fall apart in death. And from a context perspective, we're starting to do that little, oh yeah, King James, this one's for you, that reminder that at the time they thought he was a descendant of Banquo, so they make Banquo the calm, temperate, reasonable one that doesn't get hooked in by the witches. So overall, a very important scene. Should you wish to do a little bit of writing now, I've got a model paragraph and some topic sentences for you. Otherwise, feel free to click off. But do have a little look at the next few scenes coming up. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. But if you're sticking with me, here is a model paragraph on the scene. So, Shakespeare presents Macbeth's shock and disbelief at his promotion to Thane of Cawdor. He claims, "The Thane of Cawdor lives, why do you dress me in borrowed robes?" The use of the declarative statement, "The Thane of Cawdor lives," reminds us that we've been privy to information that Macbeth has not. There's no reason for him to believe it could be true. The rhetorical question then introduces a clever metaphor that is then extended throughout the play. He sees the title as a garment, a robe that can be put on or taken off. The adjective borrowed in this case is effective as it suggests he doesn't see the role as rightfully his, a point of irony considering the later actions he will take to become king. So there we have a little model paragraph with a very kind of heavy focus on language analysis. We've got some critical terminology all the way through. So the declarative sentence is this bit. We've got the rhetorical question, this bit. We have metaphor, and then we have word classes, words like adjective, just boosting up our grades even further. If you would like to have a go, have a little look at the next slide. Where we've got some useful topic sentences. So I'll leave you here. You can pause and you can jot them down, have a practice, give them into your teacher. If you've written paragraphs for a little bit of feedback, or alternatively, feel free to ask me questions in the comments. If there is anything that you'd like me to cover that I haven't already, please do let me know again in the comments and I will do my best to create some videos for you. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so you can keep on track of all the new videos coming your way. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and happy revising.